Hi, it's Sharon from SharonTheReader.com. This morning was not like any other morning. The person in question, and he has spoken to me before, was David Bowie. So I'm just going to give you what he said. And it kind of started off to me in a funny way, but not humorously funny, by saying, well, what have you done to your world? So, much as he was saying this, it wasn't a humorous thing. It was an observance of what we had done to the world in his eyes. And he started off talking about fires, that would probably be the bushfires, the flooding that had gone on. And he said, you need to look at your world and to look at your world leaders. He didn't specifically say anyone in particular. He said your world leaders. He then mentioned Black Lives Matter. And he said the most astounding thing for him to watch was, in the middle of a pandemic, people were willing to actually take to the streets, put their lives at risk for this one cause, that Black lives did matter, and they mattered to him as well. So he said, perhaps this time it will be done properly. You will get what you want. Because he said, you almost had it in the 60s, but you let it go. I've heard that before from someone else, and I think it was Sam Cooke. And the words were very much the same. So his thing was, if people were willing to take to the streets with the pandemic going on, that was killing thousands of people, then it must be something that people were taking very seriously and they really wanted change. And he was very much for that type of change and thought it very much overdue. He was very clear on what he had to say about world leaders. And he didn't go into anyone specifically, as I say, and he wasn't talking about every world leader. He just said, you elect these people, you vote for these people, you put them into power, and you don't really listen to what they're saying. Or if you're listening to what they're saying, you're listening to their slogans. You're not listening to what is the underbelly of what their achievements are to be in years to come. It was kind of the impression I got of pay attention. Don't look at what a man says. Look at what he does before you ever cast a vote. Look very clearly at what he does, how he treats people, how he will treat the world, how he will treat his own people in the world. And he wasn't going towards dictatorship, but he was going towards the strength of a personality that would actually work for the people, that this person would be looking out for their best interest, making decisions that were beneficial to them, not ones that were going to do damage or do harm. So at the end of the day, he was very into that, and he stressed it a lot. He made a lot of points on that look at a person. Don't listen to the slogans. Look, listen, and take into account what they've done with their lives before and what sort of characteristics and what sort of character they had. So on that one, it was kind of made very clear. Take a very good look at who you're putting in power. He wasn't talking about people being a dictator. If, for instance, they were to implement rules, if they were to go with certain decisions. That wasn't what he was worried about. His thing was, do not allow people into power who are going to damage the people of the country, because at the end of the day, they simply had the power to do so. So he was very, very vocal about that, and there was no doubt that it was something that had been on his mind for some time. He then said, and he was very interesting, he said, I would not like to have certain people's karma, and he was talking about politicians and people in government. He says, because he says, when their karma hits them, he says, I am so glad that it is not mine. He then told me that he had taken care and dealt with his karma while in this world, which he calls your world. That's a phrase that he's used, and I heard him use that before. Your world, meaning he had passed on to the next life. His thing was, that was karma he did not want to be carrying around with him. And it was put very clearly that certain world leaders would have their karma, and it would certainly not be good. He then talked about a little bit about his daughter, and he said that she had become a beautiful woman, looking very like her mother. And he said her mum has a habit of saying that she looks like me. He said, and there is absolutely no resemblance to me. So it was something he thought that cheered his wife up, that kept her, or maybe it was something in her personality, the child's personality, that at the end of the day, Lexi had a little bit of her father in him, in the way she would look at things and approach situations and who she was as a person. He then said, and I thought it was really nice, he said, my son and his family, I listen to his thoughts on a regular basis, and they astound me. They're so spot on. So he was really giving an awful lot of praise to his family. He then came off with an interesting line, and not one that I would have ever thought up, but he said, when I look around me and I think of the man who fell to earth, if he fell to earth today, what would he ever make of what we have done to our world? How we have destroyed our climate with the climate change, and some people being active, but not enough. It's sort of something we've been aware of, but have never really, except for some people, have never really got really into in a big way. And this was destroying, he says, like a ball of fire. He says, your world. And you sit and you are so unaware of it. Now, on that one, he was angry. And I heard the anger in his voice. He made a few predictions as well. But before I'm going to give the predictions that he actually gave to me, he did say one thing. He said that he was a working class guy. And he said his mother was more conservative in her approach to life, but his father was a very quiet man, and his thing was he believed in trade unions. And he said it meant nothing to me, nothing, in the sense that he was going a totally different direction. But he said he always has great admiration for his father. He then slipped nicely in, and I thought it was kind of funny because I actually haven't gone through the meaning perhaps of the words of the songs. But he then did bring in the man who sold the world. And he said, or should I say, the men who sold the world. He says, because it is happening right under your noses, and you're not taking notice of that either. On that one, he was kind of wake up and smell the coffee. Stop being led and start to think. And think hard. He said that there was 4 things should always be implemented in any worthwhile society. The first one, he said, was housing conditions. That everyone should have a home. That there is no reason today that anyone should be lying or sleeping on the street rough. And yet, he says, you see it in virtually every place you go. And he says, I have travelled a lot in my time. The next thing he said was healthcare. Healthcare should be free for all. Because at the end of the day, a society without good healthcare is going to have a knock-on effect onto economics. And economically, you would have a serious problem with the job market. So that was another thing. He could link these things together. And he said, and the fourth thing is that there shouldn't be unemployment, except for people who were ill, for people who really couldn't work, had a disability, were maybe just mentally unstable for a little while. And he wasn't talking about mental breakdowns. He seemed to be talking about people who were going through depression and stuff like that. Something he said he went through himself. He says, but with those 4 pillars intact, you have a working society. And he says, no one stops and thinks about those 4 things. And that's all it is. 4 things bring together a healthy society. He says, if you take one of those things away, you're immediately dealing with an unhealthy society. The guy was really on the ball. I can't put it any other way. It was kind of like, I was going to say like a shotgun riddling at you, but it wasn't like that. The last time I spoke with him, he was cool in his outlook. He was cool in what he was doing. He didn't seem to be suffering anything that was bothering him. This time, I would say that there was maybe not a little bit of anger, but there was a little bit of, what are you doing? And it did make me think, what are we doing? He then came up with another thing, and this was more of what I would call telling you what the future held. And he said, Donald Trump will never do a second term. It'll never happen. With that, he didn't seem to, and that seemed to be something that he was quite glad about, in the sense that things could be put right that had been put wrong. He then said that one of the things with him, he says, and I have slept, he says, on many couches, and I have slept in the back of cars, and I have slept in vans. Whilst I became quite a wealthy person, it was very helpful to my family, because that was one thing I wanted to leave in place, that no matter what was happening in the outside world, that they would always be financially taken care of. And not just his wife, but also his children and his grandchildren. This is obviously something he had thought about. He says, because I came from a working class background. He says, but the couches, which he seemed very grateful for when he looked back, the vans and the back of a car, he says, that's where I was living at times. He says, so don't look at me and think I am a wealthy man. He says, I created wealth through a talent that I didn't even think I would get anywhere with. He was very much talking about his family. and there was a lot of love, and there was a lot of admiration for his family. So that was nice. He said, I love my wife, and I will always love my wife. He says, and only she can verify this, but flowers are sent to her every week from him. So it seemed like that was something he had put in place before he had actually passed. And it was quite funny when I think about it. Very serious material he was given, but when I think of the, well, what have you done to your world? I thought, oh my God, it's me he's talking to. But when he really got into it, it was, what have you done to your world? So it was a very interesting conversation. He didn't mince his words. He said exactly what he thought. He explained exactly where he was coming from. And personally speaking, I would think I would be a fairly aware person of the state of the world going on around me. But he really brought it to new levels. And I will give him full credit for that, because it was most fascinating. I would have never linked the bushfires up with climate change. That would have went over my head. Same with the floods, where he was able to actually knit pieces together and then hand you the substance of what he had. And you know, maybe he's right. Maybe while, and I'm talking across the globe here, maybe while we cast our votes for whatever we're casting our votes for, whatever party, what are we casting our votes based upon? That was an interesting one for me. So that's really all I can give you on David Bowie. This time I will say, the last time I caught him in like a lab, which was a very strange thing. But this time, and it was cool. That was a very cool meeting. This was more a very conversation-y piece he was giving. He showed his intelligence to be quite remarkable. You know, you think David Bowie, superstar, songwriter, singer, wonderful dancer, actor, but you don't think of David Bowie and politics. He says, and I didn't deal a lot in my songs with politics. I wasn't Bob Dylan. I didn't do that. He says, but there were times when I did put it into my songs. He says, but sometimes it slipped through people's hands and they didn't catch it. He also, and I thought this was really funny, but very cute, very, very sweet. He said, Bob Dylan has a new album out. He says, and I would advise you to buy it because there was a lot of work put into it. He says, it was Dylan at his best. He says, so, you know, it's just worth saying, I kept an eye on that. And the work in that is superb. He kept going and he kept going till he got it all out. And when he got it all out, he seemed happy. From me to you, I would just like to say, maybe you found something in this. Maybe you haven't. Personally speaking, I did. But I would just like to say the usual, which is take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and thank you for your time, and I will speak again later. Take care. Bye.